In the previous video, you saw some amazing applications of artificial intelligence into a variety of different games, from first-person action combat games to more third-person adventure-oriented games, board games, puzzle games like open-world, sandbox-type games, real-time strategy games, and of course racing games as well. Each of these had some application of artificial intelligence into some part of the game. Over the rest of this course, we're going to treat each of these applications as instances of interactive agents. So even though in the little details of all these applications of AI are subtly different in many ways, we're going to consider them as types of interactive agent. And this will help us learn the common patterns behind each of those possible applications and learn from them and study them and, well, cover them over the rest of the course. So you might be wondering, what exactly is an interactive agent? And that's a term that's borrowed from the AI community, and we'll look at the theory behind that in the next lesson. But for now, let's just look at it as a system. What is an agent if you look at it from a systemic perspective? It has, on the left, some inputs, which it takes in, and on the right, its outputs. The inputs are pieces of information and facts and data that it needs to gather from the world around it. And this information is perceived and then fed into the agent. On the right, the pieces of output are going to be things that the agent needs to perform in the world, so actions, orders, commands, and even potentially pieces of content. It might generate some things as an output. So this is a very simplistic view of what an agent is, but it gives you the big picture of the kind of things we're going to talk about in this course. Before we even dig into any more details, I think it might be useful to look at some examples. For example, a board game. If you can think of that as an interactive agent, it might require a board configuration as an input with its own pieces and my pieces as the opponent. Useful as a piece of information for playing chess in this case is whose turn it is, and if there's a timer, you need to know how much time is left to make informed decisions at the right time. The output of this interactive agent will be a set of moves, knowing exactly which piece needs to be moved at which turn. Here's another example of an interactive agent for a wolf. The wolf takes into account different pieces of information about the terrain nearby, points of interest, watering holes, sources of food, and other nearby animals, for example, or even the player. The output of the interactive agent for the wolf is going to be movement and animations. For example, running, walking, lying down, eating, drinking. Each of these are animations that the game uses to generate the illusion of a wolf, and this will come back often. We'll see a lot of these movement animation as output. An enemy soldier, as inputs, takes into account everything about the level nearby, like whether something is traversable or hidden, can he move here, and also a sense of the player location, which it needs to be able to do his job as a soldier. So where is the player? And potentially a sense of what other enemies in the game are doing. The outputs are going to be likewise moves and animation, but also potentially voice messages. So I'm throwing a grenade. A game director here as inputs may be responsible for watching multiple players, in this case 3-4 players, and their progression through the level. The output of the interactive agent will be spawning more zombies, or fewer zombies, as time goes by, depending on whether things are too boring or whether things have got too intense. And maybe even adjusting the difficulty of certain special infected that are spawned throughout the level. A terrain generator, in this case, if it's an infinite terrain that is created over time, you can think of that also as an interactive agent. It takes a single world seed that describes this whole world and also the player position. And as the output, it generates chunks of landscape, one at a time, as the player moves. It might also include spawn points for these sheeps and other entities in the terrain that are included to bring the terrain to life. This is also the responsibility of this interactive agent. Here's a puzzle game. The interactive agent that is tutoring or helping the player through the game might require a sense of progression, how well the player is doing, what tiles have been completed and what tiles have not, which skills the player already knows and which skills are required to solve this puzzle. Some text-based hints like this one to help the player learn, and even some specific cues like this one to help guide the player. So those last two are outputs. A buddy character in the world is going to need also a sense of what's around it, geometry, cars, buildings and enemies, and of course a sense of what the player is doing and his current state. The output of a buddy is going to be also animation and movement, but also lines of dialogue and supporting actions like healing or passing a weapon over and so on. A strategic commander will need a sense of its own buildings in the world, as well as the squads that it has control over, and the same thing for the enemy, of course. Then, as an output, it might generate orders of what units and what buildings to construct, and assignments of units into squads, and then commands for those squads. All of this kind of falls under the responsibility of the interactive agent that's doing strategic command. So, as you saw, there are lots of subtle details in how these are different, but they all comply to the same template. They're all interactive agents in their structure, and if you look at them as a system, we can study them that way. And over the rest of the course, we'll see exactly how that works in more details, and we'll look at the specific patterns behind each of them, and breaking down the skills you need into multiple different components.